Did you guys end up going to the Christmas? Marlette, she said it was really good, but about half of it was Christmas concert and more contemporary Christmas music. She said it wasn't bad, but the episode. Eventually, they will put that out there so you can watch that too. I don't know. We can't. No, we haven't fully missed it yet. So before we get started, a couple of things. I was told to ask if you think there might be enough interest about maybe us doing a church trip to the Holy Land. Anybody be interested in something like that? I've never been. We've gotten our passports. We've tried 3 times and never been able to make it. The first time was when they did that fuel surcharge thing, and it cost more to have the fuel than to even have the ticket. The second time, it got canceled because there wasn't enough people from our last church, and then the third time was COVID. So it's like, but would anybody be interested in something like that?
When are you thinking?
No, not tomorrow, Leah. The 2 best times to go tend to be around October, November, or February, March, somewhere in there. I would lean more towards probably the fall dates, but I don't know that for certain. It just kind of depends on what kind of deals they can give us and prices. The thing about if you go in like December or January, it's their winter, which is their rainy season, and that kind of gets a little nasty. I mean, you can still see a lot, but and then of course you don't want to go in the summer because it gets hot and everybody gets violent, you know. So
it depends on what the COVID situation is at the time. We don't know that.
And of course, that's still a factor. Exactly. So, but I just wanted to throw that out there. I think there's probably enough interest we could get a trip together, but I don't know who all would want to do that. So I think it'd be neat. I've never seen one done, but since we've been going through Genesis, we could do the Jesus stuff too. And I want to do that, but it'd be neat to kind of do some of this Old Testament sites and maybe go to Mamre and where, you know, Abraham is buried and Sarah is buried, and kind of some of those things too. So just something we're thinking about, but if we're going to do it, we probably need to start planning it because it usually takes a while to get something like that together. So if you know anybody who might be interested, let them know that we're thinking about it. And I'd say probably after the first year, we'll put together maybe a meeting, an informational meeting, and see what we can find out. And Chris Carr has been on me to make sure I announce it to you guys. So.
No, last week you said I didn't, or last time you said I didn't remind you, and I'm like, I didn't know I was supposed to. So I haven't been on it, have I? Because he asked me last time, I'm like, I didn't know I was supposed to. So reminder.
Any other announcements before I pray and we get started?
Isaac tonight. He is less than 24 hours from completing his training. We'll get him next week. But he's out in the field right now. He's been out since Monday. And this is his final hurrah. They have a 17-mile run at some point in the next 24 hours, and that is the final.
That sounds like hell to me. So.
It probably is.
I don't mind being outside, but the 17 miles of running.
No, it's not running, it's a rock. It's a
full pack.
It's full pack year march of 17 miles.
Oh, you can do that, Sam?
How long do I get to take to make it?
Take a week.
I was gonna say. Well, let's pray. Hey, Father, I thank you for this day, and I thank you to to be back with this group and to be studying your word. Lord, we do lift up Isaac and the whole group of young people who are completing this test. Lord, we just pray that somehow in the midst of this, they might find what they need to find and be who you've made them to be. Lord, in the midst they encounter you. So Lord, we also then pray that we would encounter you tonight. So make yourself known amongst us. May your spirit pervade our conversation. And Lord, as we dig into your word, may we encounter what you have in store for us tonight. We pray this in the powerful name of Jesus. Amen.
It's the questions on names.
So last week, we had a little bit of a cliffhanger, right? Right. I mean, or last week, 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, had that holiday break, it threw everything off. So we're ready for Genesis 19, and we're ready for verse 12, correct? Am I right?
Yep.
You said that like you're questioning.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's been 2 weeks, maybe a refresher.
So, do we need a refresher? Or we just want to dig in? All right. So the first paragraph is 12 through 14. It said, then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of the place, for we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against the people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-laws who were to marry his daughters, up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons-in-laws to be jesting. Ooh. Ooh. So what do you think? What stands out to you?
Well, he got warned.
He got warned, they got warned, yeah. So I'm going to ask a question. By our standards today, are these sons-in-laws or not?
No.
They're not married yet.
So it says that they're sons-in-laws, but it says that they're not married, which means that this is the term we would use for a fiance. But as I think I've said in the past, maybe I have, maybe I haven't, I don't know. The Jewish custom for marriage, have I talked to you guys about that before?
That was in our Sunday school.
It was in the other Sunday school class. Okay, so I'll just do a quick overview of that. The reality is we think of Jewish marriages as being arranged marriages, correct? And to a certain degree, they are. That is correct. But what you probably don't realize is that each of them has a choice. The future groom, the future bride both have a choice. So what would happen is the future bride, the future groom, and the two fathers would come together and they would have a meeting. After the meal was over, the two fathers would go in the other room and they would determine the bride price. Once that was settled, the father of the groom would come into the room, he would pour a glass of wine, he would hand it to his son, and that would be it. There would be no words spoken. The son, if he chose to accept this offer of marriage, this betrothal, would take that glass of wine, take it to his future bride and said, I give you this cup as a sign of my life and a sign of my love. She would have three choices. She could not take the cup and it would be over. She could take the cup, say no, and give it back and it would be over. Or she would take the cup, drink the cup, and say, and I give you my life as well. And they would be engaged. They would legally be married in all ways, with the exception of where they lived. They weren't supposed to be intimate with each other. They weren't living together until after the wedding ceremony. Typically, this would take about a year, because what would happen is the groom then would have to go prepare a place. And they would have to build a home or buy a home or secure a home or whatever they might do before the marriage could be officiated and consummated. Does that make sense? Now, I say all that because there's a lot of really neat symbolism in the way we do things. First of all, think about communion. We just prayed over loaves and the cup. Jesus took the Passover ceremony and uplifted it to being an engagement ceremony. I mean, isn't that what we do? This bread is my life. Take, eat, do this in remembrance of me. This cup, it represents my blood of the new covenant poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Drink from it, all of you, and do so in remembrance of me. He was taking that symbol of their heritage and their relationship to God and making it something even more powerful, even more deep. Does that make sense? By the same token, think of like the passage where Jesus says, in my Father's house, there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have not told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go to prepare a place for you, then I will come again to take you to where I am. You hear that wording? Hear that marriage kind of connotation to that? So I say all that to say these two young men had already been through the engagement ceremony. For all intents and purposes, they were married, but they had not secured a place yet. So therefore there was no wedding and they had not consummated the marriage. Does that make sense? It's a little different from our culture. Well, it's a lot different from our culture, but you need to understand. So these two guys, they still technically could get out of it, but it'd be really hard to do so. And as we are in the Christmas season, the same thing is true with Mary and Joseph. They went through that ceremony, they were engaged to each other, and Joseph's job was to now go secure a place. And while he's securing a place, Mary goes and visits her cousin Elizabeth, and whenever she comes back, his only choice is to divorce her. Even though they've not had a wedding ceremony, in order to break that, it has to be a divorce. Does that make sense? Because legally they were already married. Now, it's interesting because here you have these two angels talking to Lot saying, who all is in your family? Who all do you want to protect? And Lot goes to these two young men and he must care about them. Otherwise, he wouldn't have tried to warn them, and otherwise he wouldn't have agreed to marry his daughters. Because remember, the passage just before this, he also had a kind of a low moment, right? When he said he was willing to send his daughters out, but they hadn't slept with anybody yet. So there's this weird dynamic going on here. You catch that? His daughters, he was willing to sacrifice them to save these two messengers of God. Yet they're saying we're coming to destroy the town. So now he's got his daughters, but he tries to go get his future son-in-laws, and they think he's joking. It's a weird situation, isn't it?
It's no different today in a lot of times.
Yeah.
You tell somebody, they think you're joking, you're serious.
I mean, who in their right mind wants to think that realistically a city is going to be destroyed? I mean, we have that happen here in the United States all the time with tornadoes and hurricanes and earthquakes, and people hear the warning signs, but a lot of them don't heed them.
Well, how about today with COVID? Some people think it was a big farce and it was a big joke.
It's, you know, it's just a reality of our condition is that we don't always accept what's truth. Any other thoughts or questions? Are you guys watching the text back there? Okay. All right. Next paragraph then, I guess, is 15 through 23. It's a little longer. When morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Get up, take your wife, your two daughters who are here, or else you will be consumed in the punishment of the city." But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him. And they brought him out and left him outside the city. When they had brought them outside the city, they said, "Flee for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the hills, or else you will be consumed." And Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lords, your servant has found favor with you, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot flee to the hills, for fear the disaster will overtake me and I die. Look, that city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved." He said to them, "Very well, I grant you this favor too, and will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I can do nothing until you arrive there." Therefore the city was called Zor. The sun had risen on the earth when the Lot came to Zor. So what do you think? What do you notice?
Now, the people that are warning them are angels,
Yes,
and the angel took his hand.
yes. I want to be real cautious here because, again, understand angel, as we understand it, is actually a Greek word for messenger. The notion of semi-translucent beings with wings coming to bring messages is not what we have pictured here. Anyone on a technicality can be an angel if you're bringing the message of God. You get that's why I was wondering if you were asking another question with that. So we don't know if these are just 2 men, if these are 2 of the angels, it seems pretty clear. I mean, when we go back to the story of Abraham sitting down to a meal with them, these are physical beings of some kind, and they have to be physical if they're going to grab a hand and yank them out of the house, right? So, do you get my little hesitation with using the word angel a little too much? Because the reality is the word angel doesn't exist in the Old Testament. It's just the Hebrew word for messenger, but we've put that word back in. Does that make sense?
What do you think about that television show, Touched by an Angel? They were physical beings.
Right. Yeah, that's probably a better understanding of kind of what's going on here. The other side of it, though, is these are not your standard angels. These are angels of war. They're coming to bring God's wrath. They're not coming to just say, "Fear not." They're saying, "You better be afraid because we're about ready to destroy some stuff." And so I find it weird that Lot wants to bargain with these guys who probably look really foreboding. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Well, the hills are probably a long way away till you might have to do it.
The reality of the Jordan Valley is it is a fairly wide valley, but the thing of it is if they had left whenever they were told to leave, they could have made it to the hills and it wouldn't have been a problem. But Lot drags his feet, doesn't he? He waits till morning. He was told to leave immediately. He was told to go get his sons-in-laws, his daughter and his wife, and to get out of Dodge. He's like, but do I really want to? And so he drags his feet, and then the irony of this is, and I keep wanting to look over here because Chris, your question about people turning back to God, even here where God's messengers are right in front of him, telling him, "You've got to do this or your life is forfeit." He still is just like, "Are you sure? Are you really sure?" I mean, God promised he wasn't going to flood the earth anymore, so he's not going to destroy anything, is he? Right? I mean, I'm reading that into it. But you get the picture? Yes.
I have a comment.
Lot is bartering like Abraham did for the number of righteous in Sodom. Different motive though.
Very different motive. So Abraham bargains with God because he wants to save as many people as possible. Lot's bartering with God's messengers because he just really wants to stay in Sodom. He likes it there. And none of us have ever had a situation where we kind of like our sin. Anybody ever been in a situation like that? Where you just, God, are you sure this is bad? Are you sure this isn't what I should be doing? Can't this be okay? Sorry, is that pushing too far? Is that meddling a little bit? Any other thoughts or questions? John, look, you got a thought.
If we're gonna barter with God, we better follow through on the promise.
Now, there's some truth to that, because you know God's gonna follow through on his end of the bargain road. Any other thoughts? Keep going.
Interesting how the town was called Zoar, where it doesn't mean small. So it's just like village of Monmouth or something like that, just village.
It's a little big place. So basically, I kind of have this picture in my head of here's big old Sodom, here's big old Gomorrah, here's little bitty Zoar, and the whole ground around them is scorched, and little bitty Zoar has kind of got this ring of it stays, but everything else is gone. Of course, we haven't got there yet. That's me jumping ahead. Any other thoughts? 24 through 26. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt.
Now, what's the sulfur?
The sulfur?
Hot sulfur is extremely hot. Think of volcanic hot. And the sulfur, with all the minerals, it will burn. It's extremely caustic.
It's something that's going to burn. It's going to burn for a long time, and it's going to burn everything it touches. Because once you get sulfur up to a temperature where it's melted and burning, it ain't going out for a while. This is not, you can kind of get a thought of like some of the forest fires we've had out west and how massive those become. But yet, even in the midst of those fires, there's still plants that don't burn. Because the fire is so fast moving, it might burn all the leaves, it might burn all the pine needles, it might burn a lot of things, but very quickly things start to grow again. This is the kind of fire that it burns and it burns and it burns and it burns and it burns, and it doesn't stop burning until there's nothing left to burn.
I forgot to do it again.
Yeah, I want to be a chemist, so they didn't let us burn sulfur. Even in college, only the lab professor got to do that one. And a little bit of it, just a little. So this is traditionally the passage where you get the notion of fire and brimstone. This is a notion of complete and total destruction. Probably, you could almost think of a nuclear bomb. That level of destruction.
Visualize that could have been an actual volcano erupting.
It could have been, but the reality of where it's at, they haven't found a place where it could have come from. The more likely answer is it's probably a comet or a meteor that God threw to the earth and just destroyed this area. Think of, if you've read the book of Revelation, it talks about, and I threw wormwood at the ground, the comet to the ground, that kind of concept. Think of, I'm not saying this, but think of, the meteor that they claim killed off the dinosaurs. We're talking, maybe not that big, but we're talking that kind of an event. Does that make sense? the cloud of smoke and dust from this destruction would hang around for a while. It would have left a mark on people's memory. How many of you can still in your mind picture the towers falling from 9/11? That kind of level of destruction on the earth.
Don said that farmers in Colorado said that the fires not really get so intense, they burn the roots, and sometimes the roots are still on fire after the fire is out.
So this is not a minor thing. And I don't fully understand why Lot's wife, who we never get a name for her, do we?
Dummy.
I almost get the impression that she becomes a pillar of salt because she stops and gets enveloped in the ash cloud that's coming after them. Kind of concept. You get what I'm saying? I mean, God could have just literally turned her into a pillar of salt, but I get more the impression that God is defending Lot and his family as they're leaving. And when she stops and turns around, she walks out of the hand of God that's protecting them. And then you have that soot and ash that just kind of, anybody seen the people at Pompeii kind of concept? Something along those kind of lines.
You ruined Nancy Teeter's image from Sunday school again.
What?
Lot's wife in the pillar song.
Oh, here. Am I ruining your pictures again, Nancy? I'm
So much so I've never heard it.
Well, I mean, think, if you read the story, you can start thinking about what is exactly going on here. To me, it makes sense that she's probably just overcome by the destruction that's going on behind them. I mean, that's my thought. Now, yes, there are times, handful, where in the rest of Scripture where God does kill people. Think of Ananias and Sapphira in the New Testament. They lied to the Holy Spirit. There are some times where God strikes people dead, but this is really rare. This kind of judgment is something that we just don't see very often. And in fact, we won't see this level of judgment again until the end of the story. And more than likely, most of us will probably be on the other side of glory and we'll be watching it from afar. It won't be us seeing this happen. And so,
Sam?
yeah.
In thinking about what you said with the cloud of dust and everything, now going back to your organic chemistry, the definition of a salt. You may be exactly correct.
It's what we think of as salt, we think primarily of table salt, but there are many different kinds of salts. Sodium chloride is the salt we have on our table. If you're not supposed to have salt, you can have magnesium chloride. It's a less salty salt, but it still kind of gets at that thing.
It's a mineral and a gas.
Right. And so the reality is, I think it'd be safer to say you have this picture of her stopping and just being overwhelmed by the destruction. And to be honest with you, if she stopped, she probably stopped because she's just overtaken with grief that her life as she knows it is over. Everyone that she knows, her home, all the things that she's collected. I mean, at one point in time, Lot was a very wealthy man, wasn't he? So I don't want to, try and make her a little more human in this. That doesn't make it right. I mean, she ultimately loses her life for it. But the other side of that is, if that level of destruction is right behind them, and God is willing to grant that Lot and his family can get to this little town, and God is protecting them until they get there, then doesn't that say a whole lot more about God than it does about this woman who chose not to accept God's gift, his grace?
Could have been, this is an example of not believing God was going to do what he said. She turned around and looked to see what was going on.
Yeah, not believing God very rarely works out for anybody, does it? Any other thoughts or questions?
But the notes at the bottom of my Bible say that about what might have happened to perhaps from a violent earthquake spewing up asphalt such as it's still found in this region.
There is the pre-components of asphalt in the area. They've done a lot of excavation and they found like, charred magma stuff sprayed. So there's a lot of different options. What we know is God said enough is enough, and he gave them a warning, and he was willing to bargain with Abraham for them, and they still weren't good enough, and he was willing to bargain with Lot, and there still wasn't enough, and finally he's just like, I got to deal with it. Any other thoughts? But yeah, think of burning asphalt. Ugh.
And then another side note on that, verse 26, it says that when she looked back and her disobedient hesitation became revealed later generations, that even today grotesque salt formations near the southern end of the Dead Sea are reminders of her fall.
So the reality is, we don't fully know exactly where these two cities are, but it's probably safe to say that they are where the Dead Sea is. And that prior to this moment, this was still a lush valley. And after this moment, for the rest of human history, it is no longer a place where living things dwell. And to that point, it's actually, the Dead Sea is right over a minor fault line. So the notion of it could have been, earthquake and some destruction, that could be the case, but I'm not for sure it could go so far as the volcano, because we just haven't found the evidence for that in the area. Does that make sense? Any other thoughts? Keep going. 27, 28. Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah and towards all the land of the plain, and saw the smoke of the land going up like the smoke of a furnace. It kind of implies this was a really quick event. There wasn't a whole lot of time. I mean, the destruction was bare minimum complete in a day, and probably a lot less than that. Any other questions or thoughts? Keep going. 29. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the plain, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow. And when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had settled, and he overthrew the cities in which, and my translation is a little weird tonight. So realistically, Lot is saved not by his own righteousness, but because of Abraham's righteousness. You ever thought about that just a second? Who are the people that are in the periphery of your life who might experience blessings because of your walk? You ever thought about it that way? I mean, Paul goes so far as to say that even if you're in an unequally yoked marriage, that a husband might be sanctified by his wife and a wife might be sanctified by the husband. They stay together and they live out their Christian walk, that they both might be saved because of that. Abraham is living out a godly life, and because of it, his nephew, who really doesn't deserve God's grace, does it? Let's just be honest. Does Lot really deserve what he's given? I mean, he tries everything he can to stay in the midst of this bad situation. And finally, God just kicked. You almost get this notion of a little toddler being dragged out of the store, kicking and screaming. You get the picture. But it's because of Abraham's righteousness that Lot is saved. Now, I'm not saying that that's always going to happen for us, but have you ever considered that your witness, your life, how you live might bring blessing to others to such a degree?
Had somebody tell me that one time. It was after Ann died, I went back to work. The other pharmacists mentioned that they had noticed how I had handled that difficult situation. Boy, stuck with me. You never know when someone wants you.
I kind of want to sit here in this high point because the next section is not very high. In fact, it gets pretty low. We just need to trudge on. Okay. 30 through the end of the chapter. Looks like it's all one paragraph. Now Lot went up out of Zoar and settled in the hills with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. So he had lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come in to us after the manner of all the world. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, so that we may preserve offspring through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. On the next day, the firstborn said to the younger, look, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, so that we may preserve offspring through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger one rose and lay with him. And he did not know when she lay down or when she rose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and named him Moab. He is the ancestor of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and named him Ben-Ammi. He is the ancestor of the Ammonites to this day.
Well, that wasn't pretty.
I warned you. I mean,
Well, both of them were sons, so what good does that do?
So a couple of things here. The reality is Lot had asked God to stay in Zoar. And then Lot was afraid to stay in Zoar. Does that make any sense whatsoever? If God said, I'm going to destroy everything, and Lot said, well, can I at least go to this little town? And God says yes, and God didn't destroy that town. Do you think Lot would have learned the lesson? But he doesn't. And so then they flee into the hills, and the girls are like, well, we're the last human beings on earth, I guess. And the sad reality is Lot's just drunk as a skunk. Of course, I mean, if you had lost all your friends and your livelihood and your wife and your world and everything, I'm not saying that's a good reason to drink, but I guess it's an understandable reason to drink. By the same token, do you now understand why the Moabites and the Ammonites and the Israelites don't get along? There's this notion where the Moabites and Ammonites always looked at, well, you guys are the descendants of Abraham. Look what God did for you guys. And we got the shaft and had to run for our lives. Can you hear that? Can you see that kind of? I realize there's a lot of names here, and some of that, back when we did that, I drew the map and we kind of labeled where the people were. Part of what Genesis is setting up for us is it's showing why all these people seem to hate the Israelites. Why is it they're always going to war with them? Why is it they're always trying to raid them and take their stuff and make them slaves? And part of it is, let's just be honest, the Israelites have not always lived the way God called them to live. And then on top of it, they've kind of they kind of get a little bratty about it. They kind of rub it in. We're God's chosen ones. What are you guys? Do you get what I'm saying? Now, we're not going to see this. There's not as much hostility here as there are between other groups, but this is pointing to where some of that comes from. And don't you think that the Israelite kids would probably give the Moabite kids and the Ammonite kids a hard time? Kids are cruel, but you can see this growing reality. And by the same token, let's just be honest. Book of Genesis is one of the best episodes of Jerry Springer you could ever watch. And every time you think it's done, you get something else. Any other questions or thoughts as we end the story of Lot? At least for now. You want to try and move on to something a little happier, maybe? No promises, but Genesis chapter 20. Yeah, we got time. 20, verse 1 through 7. From there, Abraham journeyed toward the region of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur. While residing in Gerar as an alien, Abraham said to his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." The king Abimelech of Gerar sent and took Sarah. Anybody hearing a little bit of a
Repeat.
Yeah, he didn't learn his lesson, did he? But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night. That didn't happen the last time either, did it? And said to him, "You are about to die because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a married woman." Now, Abimelech had not approached her, so he said, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent people? Did he not himself say to me, 'She is my sister'? And she herself said, 'He is my brother'? I did this in the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands." Then God said to him in the dream, "Yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart. Furthermore, it was I who kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now then, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all that are yours." What do you think? He said it was kind of better. He did say it was a lot better.
Well, this king must have believed in God.
Or at least he believed in the dream he had.
Yeah.
Bare minimum, that's true. What's the other unique thing about this passage? There's one word I want to grab onto. Did you notice it? What's God call Abraham? A prophet. Isn't this the first time we've heard that word? Abraham has gone from just being God's friend to now being God's prophet.
Well, surely very smart.
No one claimed he was smart, Kay. He's just the one God chose to use. And let's face it, I mean, you've known some of my colleagues. Just because we're called by God doesn't mean we're smart about it. We do some dumb things sometimes.
Yes.
Unfortunately, so some days. What do you think about that? This really is the first time that anyone has been given that title. The purpose of Abraham. Remember that first covenant God made with Abraham back in chapter 12? I will be your God and you will be my people, and through you all the nations of the world will be blessed. Isn't that the core tenet of what it means to be the mouthpiece of God, to be a prophet, is to bless the world, to bring them closer to God? Of course, in order for Abraham to get that, he's got to do something stupid. God says, it's probably one of these things where God says, okay, Abraham, if you didn't know before, you're my prophet. You're not supposed to be doing this kind of stuff.
Was he feared for his life again? Is that really what that you think? That's what it was previously.
That's what it was previously. He feared for his life while they were down in Egypt, but
Can't some makes me wonder why he would do this again, like what was going on for this big scenario?
It does say he was an alien though, so that means he was an outsider.
he was an outsider, yeah. But the other side of it is I kind of want to wonder about Abimelech, because Sarah's got a kid. They already have Isaac, right? No, we don't. But she'd be pregnant, wouldn't she?
I don't think so.
Maybe not. Okay, maybe I'm wrong. Okay, I'm fast forwarding too much. I pulled a gem. 21's the birth of Isaac. We may not get there tonight. So, okay, so I'm wrong. I can admit it. I messed up.
But it has to be within a year because the
It's
angel said it.
right.
Come next year.
Within 1 year of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have a kid. So this couldn't be more than a couple of weeks after that event.
And that may be why they fled to out of the city of Georgia and knew that stuff was gonna be great since that one city, since the two cities were gone.
Oh, yeah. So you got that side of it.
There's a whole story going on, we don't know.
You know what happens whenever a power vacuum is created, right? They talked a little bit about it. I think it was in the 1930s when they really hunted down the gangs of Chicago. And instead of taking out those gangs and making the city safe, it actually just created a bunch of little bitty gangs. Things got worse. And so you have this region of Sodom and Gomorrah where these two city states, remember kings, they had their own king, are now gone. And the resources that are left, which probably aren't a whole lot, but there's still some there. And all those smaller villages that depended on the big city, all of this area is now up for grabs. And so it probably makes sense that Abraham and Sarah are like, you know what, we probably don't want to stick around here for a little while. And they head south. And Abraham thinks, you know, we're going to some dangerous territory. So let's play. I can't even say it with a straight face. It didn't work well the last time, Abraham. Why do you think it's going to work well this time?
Two kings.
A new sucker? I don't know. Any other thoughts? Just read the rest of the paragraph. You got it? What you got?
He gave to him in the dream, basically said, don't touch her, but I'm trying to remember last time. That was the situation last time.
Well, the Pharaoh hadn't slept with her then either that we know of. I mean, it doesn't say that he took her as a wife. And it's implying that Abimelech is taking him as a wife.
So, because Isaac's gonna be coming along, he
Wants to make sure there is no notion that this is anybody but Abraham's child that's coming. Any other thoughts?
A lot of meddling with God's part, you know. It's like he goes with not talking to anybody. Like he goes, Abraham, his prophet, he goes to not talking to him for months and years, and then his wife gets kind of taken, and he talks to the guy who takes his wife, and it's kind of
So in general, God wants to operate in this way where he just lets us live out the plan, right? He gives us free will, but he's like, no. This has to go right, and you guys are messing it up. So I gotta make sure this happens right. And we don't get, outside of Jesus coming, there's very few times where we get this level of God meddling in what's happening. As a whole, God just says, you guys are human. It's your own choice. You get what you deserve. You get what you bring upon yourself. I'll let it go. But for this particular season, God's like, no, I really want this to happen. And it's got to happen this way. And so you're right, Grant. He just keeps meddling.
When God has a plan, we might try to mess it up, but his plan is gonna come to fruition because it's his plan, no matter what.
So I need to make a statement, and I hope you hear this as a positive statement. Every single human being is equally loved by God. Every single human being is equally loved by God. But not every single human being is equally strategic to God's plan. Do you hear the difference? That some people never come into the web of the center of God's plan. They can live their lives and just kind of live it out and do what they do. And they could live a good life and never be a part of that intricate plan that God has. But there's other people that are extremely strategic to God's plan. Abraham is one of the first. Noah was one of those. We're going to see as we move forward, Abraham's family becomes very strategic. It doesn't mean that they're better. Do not hear me say that at all. Just because someone is more strategic to God's plan does not mean they're better. Doesn't mean they're worse. It doesn't mean they're loved more. It just means that God says, this is the one I'm going to use. So if you get to be used by God to help someone else and to bless someone, take that as a blessing. And if someone else is the one that's used and it's not you, take that as a blessing. Because let's face it, anybody really want to be Abraham at this point? Anybody want to sign up for that? It kind of makes me think of a statement I've heard, and I don't know why, it tends to be older ladies. The older guys don't tend to say this, but we've heard this at multiple churches. Man, we just have to have the patience of Job. No, the only way you get the patience of Job is to go through what Job went through. You don't want that. Does anybody really want that? I mean, it's like sometimes being in the center of God's will is a little more painful than we'd like to admit. That's why a good friend of mine who is a minister, he preferred on Sunday morning to just be a greeter. And he'd stand at the door and he'd open the door for people. And he was always fond to say, it's better to be a doorkeeper in the house of the Lord than anywhere else. It's the safest place because people are just walking by and they really don't want to talk to you because they're trying to get in out of the elements. Abraham is deeply blessed by God. He's the first prophet. He's the first one God makes a covenant with, but he keeps messing it up. And God's got to keep correcting.
But does he even know he's a prophet at this point?
Not yet. I mean, God's told this to Abimelech. He hasn't told it to Abraham yet.
So why wouldn't he be tending to mess it up?
I mean, let's face it, as human beings, we tend to mess things up. That's just the way we do it. We can find a way to mess it up, we tend to. Sometimes on purpose and a lot of times on accident. We're just really good at messing things up. We don't even have to try very hard and we can mess it up.
It's not like we haven't heard an example of growing up to show how to live his life.
You know, and there's a reality to that. Remember, we haven't been given the 10 Commandments yet. We haven't been given any of the rules and regulations yet. We don't have the Sermon on the Mount yet. Abraham doesn't have.
There's no rule book yet.
There's no rule book. It's just God saying, follow me. If you follow me, it will be okay. But isn't that what he said to Adam and Eve too? And of course, we see what they did and how that turned out.
He lied about his sister, though. He knew that was wrong. You don't need a rule book to figure that out.
He had to have known it was wrong.
Yeah, he had.
Well, you gotta read ahead now. My wife mentioned it.
All right, let's read the rest of the chapter because it's one big paragraph. So verse 8. So Abimelech rose early in the morning and he called all his servants and told them all these things, and the men were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? How have I sinned against you that you have brought such great guilt on me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that ought not to be done." And Abimelech said to Abraham, "What were you thinking of that you did this thing?" Abraham said, "I did it because I thought, there is no fear of God in all this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. And when God caused me to wander from my father's house, I said to her, 'This is the kindness you must do to me. You must do me. At every place to which we come, say of me that he is my brother.' Then Abimelech took sheep and oxen and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham and restored his wife Sarah to him. Abimelech said, 'My land is before you, settle where it pleases you.' To Sarah he said, 'Look, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. It is your exoneration before all who are with you. You are completely vindicated.' Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and also healed his wife and the female slaves so that they bore children. For the Lord had closed fast all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife." Does it make it right? No. Did he tell the truth? Technically, kind of. He's definitely making excuses. So,
But he gets rewarded,
and then he gets rewarded again.
because that still happens today, you get rewarded for dishonesty or whatever, and it's like a cycle.
Chris, your question, he doesn't even apologize, does he? He doesn't, he just makes excuses.
He did say, I was afraid that they would kill us if they knew that he was shooting my wife.
Notice how he puts it at the feet of Abimelech. I was afraid you guys don't fear God. So, it's all your fault. All you can do is shake your head sometimes, isn't it? Yes, Leah.
He says that Abimelech seems more godly than Abraham.
Yeah, there's that reality. Abraham, who is the prophet of God, says that he was afraid that they didn't fear God, and yet Abimelech is the one who acts righteous. When he realizes this is not good, he fixes the situation. The pagan is the one who does the right thing, and Abraham, who's the one following God, is the one who makes excuses. That's never happened before, has it? It's never happened. Yes, Grant.
And so reading about like what happens afterwards kind of makes it I don't know if it actually says that this is that like Abraham kind of like ransacked the place trying to get Sarah back. So like he kind of threw salt onto the bone with him like too.
So, from a different perspective, it's almost like, remember, like, look, I don't want to cause any problems. Anything I got's yours, because just don't cause any problems. And so he's like, fine, I'll take this silver, and I'll take this land, and I'll take these animals. And how about some more slaves? I need some more servants, right? He's only got 380 fighting men. He's probably got more than that now, but why not? I'll lie about it and get the benefit for it. Sure.
Well, then he said that God had given Abimelech his wife and his female servants so that they could have children. But then my Bible says, for the Lord had caused all women to be infertile because of that.
So it's like a plague. Everywhere Sarah goes, because she's infertile, she makes everybody else infertile. That's not a complex waiting to happen, is it?
But it doesn't say how long they were infertile. I thought this took place over a short period of time.
In theory, yes. We don't know how long they're down here. We don't know how long it took before God reached out to Abimelech and said, look, you're about ready to do something you're going to regret. And you've already done something I'm making you regret right now.
It's like with what's going on, it kind of makes me think that it's taking a much longer period of time. So it's not like a couple of days where you realize someone's infertile.
You know, it takes a little bit. Yeah, they've been there long enough that they've noticed something's a little fishy. I mean, you know, in general, there are so many people born every year, and there are so many people who die every year. It's a relatively, you can kind of track that stuff. And if all of a sudden you go a couple of weeks where no one gets pregnant, maybe even a month or two where no one gets pregnant, someone's got to think something's up. It's been long enough that they've noticed this is,
Could she also have maybe been like a part of an error or something?
probably. I mean, that's the way most of the time it works at this point.
That could be the reason why we have a sign gap in here.
But I just can't help but shake my head. Anybody else? I mean, it's just like,
How old is she by now? It's like 86 or something.
I don't remember how old she is whenever Isaac is finally born, but she's at least 85, 86 or older. Hey, she's apparently still really pretty. I mean, so she's got that going for her. You know, she's almost 100 and still so beautiful that men still want her. I mean, isn't that what people want today? I mean, I'm sorry. I'm gonna say that over to the side. Not touching that again. Any other thoughts? We want to move on to something hopefully a little more happy, or at least for a little bit. I say that, then I look down and I see the headings and I realize it's going to be happy for about this long. It's going to be happy for about that long. Chapter 21, 1 through 7 looks like. The Lord dealt with Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to his son, whom Sarah bore him, and Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Now Sarah said, God has brought laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. And she said, who would have ever said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. Little bit of an uptick, right? It stays up for just a little bit. So Abraham was 100. Do we remember how much younger than her? Is she like 10 years younger? So she might be around 90, somewhere there. I don't remember exactly. Any thoughts about this fairly straightforward passage? And not too Jerry Springer-ish? No, we might as well dig into it. Let's let it get bad again. Verse 8. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. So she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman and her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac. The matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also, because he is your offspring. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba.
I like the part where God said to Abraham, do whatever Sarah said.
I like that too.
Yeah.
Just keep going.
There are sometimes God says yes. There's sometimes that God says no. There's sometimes God says wait. There's sometimes God just says, I can deal with it. It's all right. Just keep going. What?
There's sometimes it says, God says, listen to your wife.
Yes, but if Abraham hadn't listened to his wife the first time, he wouldn't have this problem now. Just saying. All right, I better stop. I'm gonna get in trouble.
Yeah, the right idea first.
Let's just read the next paragraph. Let's move on before I have to sleep on the couch.
Hang on. So I have a question.
Okay, dang it.
But how, it says that he handed Hagar their son. I mean, this kid's old.
This kid's like 12 or 13 years old.
Bring a thing of water.
I don't know.
She's a big one.
But my feet are not.
Just for clarification, remember, Ishmael is a good 10 to 12 years older than Isaac. And Isaac is weed, so we're talking about 2 or 3 here, which means Ishmael may be 15 or 16. But they're calling him a child. And at 15 or 16, most men were getting married.
Well, and they already said that he was old enough to be considered a man in the house.
Yeah, he's old enough to be considered a man, but they're still calling him a child. What's that say?
We're all childish, but
Well, yes, there. He apparently isn't going out and spreading his. Well, I don't even want to go that route. He's not trying to be an adult. He's not adulting. He's not going out and becoming a man. Failure to launch. Which, if you put that into perspective, it makes the rest of the story somewhat comical. Because let's read on. So verse 15. When the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. This is a 15, 16-year-old teenager. I mean, she's probably bigger than him, and she's, go get under the bush. Sorry, it sounds a little comical to me. Shame. But here's the thing, he's not smart enough to get out of the sun. Sorry, this is just comical to me. 16, then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about a distance of a bow shot. For she said, do not let me look on the death of the child. And she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink.
She put him under the bush for that.
She put him under the bush to die.
He's a pampered prince, then, I mean.
It kind of paints that picture, doesn't it?
He's been pampered all the time.
You get that kind of picture, don't you? Abraham's son, he was the only son of Abraham for a long time, and Abraham's pretty wealthy. Remember this. I mean, he just got another 100,000 pieces of silver, you know. He just doubled his portfolio with one stupid act.
You gotta realize he probably is also fairly upset himself because he's been the only son, and then, you know, he's got this brother now, and then he gets kicked out of the house because.
Oh, the jealousy of siblings.
I mean, I'm just saying, he's got to feel bad. He was just kicked out for being alive and
He was kicked out when he was old enough to already be out of the house.
I mean, yeah, but. and there's a not only is he kicked, but he's kicked out and told like, go away and never come back, kind of thing.
Well, let's be honest, to a certain degree, you're right. So Ishmael and Hagar are losing the family that they know. But by the same token, there's no way of knowing where Abraham's family is going to be. They haven't settled very many places for very long. They seem to just keep moving around. Now, but isn't it just comical the way she's talking about this young man who really could should be able to take care of himself, and she's just concerned he's going to wither away and die. You mothers have never felt that way about your kids, have you? What you got, Nancy? I see it, your brain's ticking.
I am not gonna have to go home tonight and watch what I take to General Hospital. This is better.
You know, truth is more strange than fiction, is it not?
My goodness.
You know, you almost get the impression, I'm sorry, Hagar must have been a beautiful Egyptian because she apparently wasn't very bright. All right, verse 21. God was with the boy, and he grew up, and he lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt. See, he finally made something of himself. Kind of.
So his mom found his wife.
Well, you know, there's that. I mean, you know, he apparently can't get his own bride, so, and it doesn't, his dad's not in the picture. Remember what I told you about how they did weddings?
Well, maybe that's mother did.
What's going on back in the corner?
Almost seems like you go back.
She asked for entity calories, the men were up to this point 30 and 40 before they were starting having children. So were they actually getting married at 15? And closer to Jesus' time, I know that they did, but they weren't living to 100 years then.
I don't know that I can actually answer that. So the question was, you know, most of the genealogies have said they were in their 30s or 40s when they start having kids. You know, it used to be in the 150s, 200s. It's going down. When they actually got married, I don't know. And it really could be. Let's cut Ishmael a little slack. It might be that at this point in time in human history, 16 is still considered a kid. I guess that could be the case. I just like this imagery of, you know, petite Hagar, Egyptian girl, dark skinned, and she's got this big old boy, Ishmael, who becomes, you know, this wonderful hunter with a bow. He's probably, I'm thinking, this big football player type guy, and she's cramming him under the bush. Get out of the sun, you know.
But it's only after he spent the time in the wilderness. So it was before.
Okay, so maybe he was scrawny before he spent some time in the wilderness. Okay. Nancy, they're breaking my images here.
In the Lion King, where Simba goes off in his wilderness, he's a scrawny little.
Yeah.
So Disney would never take. Disney would never take a biblical story and try and turn it into something to make money, would they? How much time we got? We still got 20 minutes. I guess we'll finish the chapter. How's that?
Covered a lot.
Well, we were, you know, whenever you get into the story, I told you, it's about a half an hour for each chapter or so, once a story. My title says Abraham and Abimelech make a covenant. Abraham and Abimelech are going round and round again. I'm wondering how this is going to end. 22 through 24. At that time, Abimelech, with Pilcote, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now therefore swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me or my offspring or with my posterity. But as I have dealt loyally with you, will you deal with me and with the land where you have resided as an alien? And Abraham said, I swear. Abimelech's like, okay. Apparently Abimelech heard about what happened down in Egypt and he did it down there, and now he's done it to me. And he's like, okay, time out, Abraham. Let's cut this off. Let's not let this happen again.
He could have heard what happened to the last place he was just at.
He could have heard about Sodom and Gomorrah. It's like, maybe we need to get on Abraham's good side.
40 is gonna be over here. Honestly, it's gonna be okay.
I just got to throw this out here. Abraham says, I swear, but notice there's nothing about Isaac that says that he's going to deal with Abimelech well. Just throwing that out there. It's going to get worse.
He's still a baby.
Well, he's still a baby, but technically, I mean, they're making an everlasting covenant between their families. Technically.
So I said that just do my descendants and yada, yada, yada.
He says,
Said my descendants.
he said his descendants. He did not talk. He did not clarify the terms of the agreement and make sure to bind Abraham's descendants as well. He only bound his descendants. He should have checked contract law, right, Dean? Read the fine print. But at least he's smart enough to realize maybe we just need to shore things up here just a little bit. Keep going, or anybody got any other thoughts? All right, 25 through the end of the chapter. When Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servant had seized, they just made a contract. Now Abraham's going to start complaining. Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this. You did not tell me, and I have not heard of it until today. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs of the flock, and Abimelech said to Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart? He said, these 7 ewe lambs you shall accept from my hand in order that you may be a witness for me that I dug this well. Therefore that place was called Beersheba, because there both of them swore an oath. When they had made a covenant at Beersheba, Abimelech with Phicol, the commander of his army, left and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham resided as an alien many days in the land of the Philistines. So Abimelech isn't just anybody. Abimelech is a Philistine. Do you think that that contract that they just made between Abraham and Abimelech actually stands very many generations?
Okay, leaves the area for nobody to remember the contract even stands.
There's some
Now,
truth.
null and void if nobody's there to remember.
I think it just points to a reality at just how broken humanity still is. They're not as evil as they were prior to the flood, but it's evident we're still pretty messed up, aren't we? And even as bad as this is, realistically, we see some of these same kind of things happen today, don't we? I mean, we're just really not any better. Any final thoughts? Because I don't want to get into the next chapter tonight. I really don't want to get into the next chapter. We could end a little early, couldn't we? You guys are okay with that? Then let's pray. Oh, God. God of us all, somehow your love never fails and you keep picking us up and dusting us off and putting us right back on the right track. Lord, I'm so grateful as I read these stories to know that even whenever I mess up, you still bring grace, you still bring love and forgiveness. And Lord, somehow in the midst of it, I pray that we might live lives that honor you. So Lord, be with us as we leave, be with us as we go throughout this week. And Lord, may you be glorified in and through us. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.